Live from Washington, D.C., Jay Sekulow Live. Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
With the Biden administration, it puts the forefront issues in the Middle East. It puts the forefront issues like Israel and protecting the Promised Land. We've got an ACLJ documentary that we put together on that very issue, protecting the state of Israel, the Jewish state of Israel. I think it's an important time now because of all these issues that we're going to be addressing. So what about the peace deals that were made? What about the idea that you don't have to figure out the Palestinian issue before you can figure out making other peace deals? What about entering in again that failed nuclear agreement with Iran? So today, I think it's just a critical time to kind of re-up our knowledge about the issues that will face our number one ally in the Middle East and a state that is so important to many of us, the Jewish state of Israel. Because we've been used to these last 4 years of an administration that was doing everything they can to protect the Promised Land. Now it's going to be up to us, putting a lot more pressure on our government, on international organizations, working with the state of Israel, working with organizations to make sure we protect the Promised Land. Check out our ACLJ documentary.
پرچم شیطان بزرگم مرگ بر اسرائیل مرگ بر امریکا.
Graphic new video of violent protests and terror attacks coming out of Israel.
They have a gender apartheid inside Gaza. Christians are evacuating because churches are being burned. Their doctrine is fascist and genocidal against Jews.
Today, the group Hamas declared a day of rage, urging attacks on Israelis.
Peace has no greater enemy than the forces of militant Islam.
At any moment, these rockets and missiles on the border with Lebanon could be sprung and fired against Israel.
Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey, perhaps others. So in 5 to 10 years, you could have a multipolar nuclear Middle East with half a dozen countries with nuclear weapons. That is a formula for insecurity.
Hamas and Al-Qaeda are these terrorist groups with the goal of destroying the West.
We got multiple officers here. We got officers running here, back eastbound, chasing, now on foot.
So we understand people are scared, and we understand that there's concern that there may be more folks out there.
When they say that Israel should be wiped out, that they mean it?
I don't have the luxury not to believe this.
Israel's right to exist has been a cornerstone for the ACLJ since its inception. With an office in the heart of Jerusalem, ACLJ continues to be a leader in the advocacy for the Jewish state of Israel. Chief Counsel Jay Sekulow has brought together ACLJ's leading experts from around the globe to present Protecting the Promised Land, the case for Israel.
We just heard Death to America, Death to Israel in the opening of this documentary. I want to start with you, David Benjamin, first. You served in the Israeli Defense Forces, still do, in the reserves. You're dealing with international law issues. But the Death to America, Death to Israel is been the thematic of these groups in the region. What is the situation in the region right now as you see it?
Well, I would say if they don't mean it, why are they making such an effort to create this build-up just about on every frontier that Israel has, particularly in the north now, in Syria? In Lebanon, it's not a new story. You have Hezbollah now with an arsenal of in the region of 140,000 rockets, all of them from Iran. You have the Houthi situation in Saudi Arabia now creeping up from the southern front. You have Hamas in Gaza, who are being supported by Iran. If you step back and look at the picture, you can see the circle enclosing around Israel and think, well, why make the effort if they're not being serious about carrying out their threats?
So, which raises the next issue, Rami, and that is the nature of the threat and the Iran factor. Iran has become a major player in the region now, and there's a history to this that a lot of people do not know.
Well, if you come from the intelligence field where I come from, we always have to measure intent and capabilities. And regarding the intent of the Iranians, we just heard death to America, and we hear it from their leaders for many, many years. Regarding the capabilities, they're trying to develop atom bombs in order to rule the world. Now, going back to what David has been saying, the Iranians have been trying to take over the Middle East, get all the way up to the Mediterranean, just like they used to rule that region 2,500 years ago. And when you listen to the Iranians and you look at their actions, the Houthis are Shiites in Yemen that are shooting missiles at Riyadh's airports and are trying to take over Bab el-Mandeb straits in the sea in order to control the oil flow to the west. So when you look at Syria, when you look at Lebanon, when you look at what they're doing with Hamas in the south, you understand that they mean business when they speak about death to America, and they mean business when they speak about death to Israel.
Iranians have stated openly, simply, openly, that they want to destroy the state of Israel. Period. Exclamation point.
They speak of illegitimacy in the name of God. From Iran, from Hezbollah, and from Hamas, you hear that it's a religious commandment that Israel should not exist, that a non-Muslim state cannot be here. If this has the upper hand, this trend, it's going to be tougher. This layer of religious fanaticism on top of political debates makes debates almost without a resolution. Because, you know, gods never compromise. People do.
You're dealing with a regime headed up by a religious fanatic. The Ayatollah in Iran has a religious view that has no place for the state of Israel, fellow Muslims who disagree with him, and our country. He is a religious Nazi. On the day we voted on the Iran nuclear deal, he tweeted out, Allah willing, Israel won't exist in 25 years.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei posted incendiary comments about Israel. He flatly predicted that Israel won't be around 25 years from now.
And he warned that between now and then, Israel would have to worry about what he called the, quote, spirit of fighting heroism and jihad.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
A bad deal is worse than no deal. We need to have a good deal here.
This deal will not stop Iran from getting a bomb. This deal will all but guarantee it.
The Iranian nuclear deal may actually be worse than we originally imagined.
I think the deal is absolutely horrible for us, but it's really, really bad for Israel.
And we're handing over hundreds of billions of dollars in sanctions relief.
Iran is going to have access to $150 billion in assets.
Israelis have been telling us, you know, this kind of deal is giving Iran the legitimacy to enrich uranium.
Once Iran is able to perform a nuclear test, it would have a shield, a nuclear mushroom all over Iran that would deter the US and Israel from doing anything to retaliate against Iran or work against Iran when it supposed jihadist groups in the Middle East or worldwide.
If Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey, perhaps others. So in 5 to 10 years, you could have a multipolar nuclear Middle East with half a dozen countries with nuclear weapons. That is a formula for insecurity.
Think of how arrogant Hezbollah will act, and Hamas, if Iran wins and it gets nuclear. So I think the stakes are very high.
If Iran gets the bomb, even if it doesn't use it, it would alter profoundly the history of the Middle East.
Iran's rulers promised to destroy my country, murder my people, and the response from this body, the response from nearly every one of the governments represented here, has been absolutely nothing. Utter silence. Deafening silence.
We have to talk about America's interest in the region, and that's starting with our defense as a country of Israel and why it's strategically important.
Absolutely. I was at a meeting not long ago, within the last year and a half, with the Egyptian Counsel in New York. And it was a meeting of members of Congress and a couple of people from think tanks. And the ambassador, he was pleading with us, saying, why don't you see the threat? He said, why don't you see the threat from the region? It's a threat to your country. It's a threat to your country before any other country. He said, we see it. We know we have Egyptian nationals in this country, and they go to mosques where they're being radicalized. And we know if Iran gets this nuclear deal, which they now have, right, we will absolutely have to get nuclear weapons. The Saudis will absolutely have to get nuclear weapons because, and here's how you know the truth. Israel has had a nuclear capability, the secret that everyone knows, for decades. And there's not been an arms race. There's not been a nuclear race in the Middle East because they know Israel will not first launch. Israel just wants a defensive capability. But they know that's not true about Iran. So first you know that Iran will use it. The second thing is Iran is developing intercontinental ballistic missiles not to reach Israel, but to reach us in this country.
Let's talk, Mark, about this. Israel's an ally of the United States, but this ongoing conflict, you look at it historically, over the modern time of Israel's existence, the last 70 years, this ongoing conflict has been continuous. And the fact is sometimes it's different players coming to the forefront. Now it's Iran. But the regional conflict focused on Israel, there's a historic record that is indisputable.
If you just look at the modern era, from 1920, Israel's given this wonderful small area for close settlement of the land in the San Remo Treaty. And then in 1922, the League of Nations sets up a mandate. Israel's finally going to have a place where Jews can come and settle. And then 78% of it is lopped off and given to Transjordan. And you think, all right, fine, the Jews will remain in that last 22%. And the first plan, the Peel Commission, gives 80% of that they try to give away, and Jews will have 20%. Throughout history, at every single point in time, all people have tried to do is cut Israel into smaller and smaller pieces, and eventually the time came in 1948, and again in 67, and again in 73, and we see it again today. They just, forget anything, let's just wipe them off the map. And yes, the players keep on changing, but unfortunately the ideology behind it has never been about peace.
There's an interesting dynamic with all this, though, and that is that the United States has a strategic interest. What is new is what the region is starting to shape like, the look of the region as far as who the players are. So I want to talk about that for a minute. There's been wars. Mark just laid out some of those wars. But then there's like the war between wars.
In the last 7 years, the Middle East went through an earthquake. Countries have been turned apart. If you look at what happened in Sudan, if you look at what happened in Egypt, if you look at what happened in even in the Palestinian Authority, a lot of changes. Israel has to face new type of enemies. The countries became proxies of Iran, and Israel has to face threats from different terrorist groups, and we call it stealth wars. And the reason we're fighting those stealth wars, which is an everyday fight, is to prevent the next war.
So when you're engaging in a stealth war, and you're the lawyer advising the military, you face different kind of challenges. The other side is not engaging in the laws of armed conflict when they engage. They use civilians as targets. This is part and parcel of how they operate. So what does that put on you as the lawyer representing Israeli military?
You've touched on a crucial legal point, because once upon a time, people spoke about the law of war. And the idea was that applies in situations where entire armies clash against one another. And these situations in between, the war between wars, as Rami has put it, what law actually applies there? And it really took Israel to stick its neck out initially and say, these are also armed conflicts. These are wars just on a lower intensity. We need to apply the same laws. We can't get by, as much of the world has expected in the past, on just applying regular principles, say, of criminal law. The idea that terrorists are criminals, you have to arrest them, put them on trial. You can't apply that to an organization like Hezbollah, which is a more powerful military than most countries on earth, or even Hamas. So legally, that has been very significant, that the law of war is actually, it's relevant on all different levels of intensity, and including in the war between wars.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The IRS now formally apologizing to Tea Party groups.
The IRS did the right thing by resolving the case with an injunction that mandated a complete change of the IRS nonprofit tax-exempt work as it relates to issue advocacy organization.
If any group feels that they're being targeted, they can go to federal court and bring our case. That's a victory.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history, to take on the IRS and win.
For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
Those of us that believe in life know that we're on the right side of history. We understand full well children are children, and they're precious in God's sight, and they're precious in our nation's sight, and they're precious to parents.
But I actually think we're winning. This is one of the social issues we're winning.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
They're rushing us to the airport, and there was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, now we're really out of Turkey and free again.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, you know, they were getting all this out.
All of the people who prayed for us through ACLJ and through your contacts, I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
But right over there and right over there are two villages controlled by Hezbollah, and we've got, coming in our background right now, jeeps from the Israeli Defense Force. This is the blue line. How significant of a zone is this? How dangerous is this?
You know, I must say that in my experience for the past 30 years, you know, I've been to this movie before.
Yeah.
Maybe the difference is now it's a 3D movie
yeah.
with so many other forces involved. But this is a security border in Israel. There's peace now. It's a fragile peace. It's a deceptive peace.
Why do you say it? We talked about that before. Just why deceptive peace?
It's deceptive because at any moment, you know, these 40,000 rockets and missiles on the border with Lebanon could, you know, be sprung and fired against Israel.
After the war, the Lebanon army took place on the forts and on the border. We see a lot of movement of the UN, but we know to the citizen vehicles that the Hezbollah own, we know they're looking out, and we know they're preparing for the next battle day.
We're asserting that Iran is actually engaging in this war with through Hezbollah. Is that the sense that you have as you train?
Sure, that's what we learn also. All the weapons, the training is all Iranian money and techniques.
You can find the Iranian regime fingerprints everywhere. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in the Palestinian arena, in Yemen, in South America.
In the north, we have Iran. Hezbollah, which is an Iranian division on our border, practically and literally and in every sense, directed directly from Iran.
When you look at your neighbors, David, as an Israeli, you've got the leadership of Syria being propped up right now by the Russians and the Iranians. Yet you have the Sunnis, in the form of ISIS, trying to gain a foothold. And you're a lawyer that gives legal advice to the military in Israel, and you've got a border with Syria.
Yeah.
What are you facing?
You know, I'd like to quote the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said, "My enemy's enemy is my enemy."
Yeah.
I think that's so perfectly sums up the situation which is developing in Syria, which is over the years. It's really complicated. It raises all sorts of legal questions about who exactly is the enemy, who's attacking you, who isn't attacking you at any given time. The map can actually change.
Rami, looking at it diplomatically, because you have to look at it diplomatically, there has been a realignment, a strategic realignment within the region. I mean, 20 years ago, the thought that the Israelis and the Saudis would have the kind of relationship they now have, completely unexpected. And it is the common enemy. You deal with Jordan and Egypt. What is the sense when you're dealing with those world leaders as they view Israel right now? How does al-Sisi in Egypt view Israel? How does King Abdullah in Jordan view Israel right now?
I was actually a guest of the King of Jordan in Amman, Abdullah, about 3 years ago. And he was speaking about the Arab Spring as the Arab Winter. He saw what's happening. He saw ISIS coming to its border from the Syrian side. He saw ISIS coming to his borders from the Iraqi side. And he felt very threatened about it. Sisi just spoke yesterday about the peace with Israel. It's 40 years since Sadat came to Israel, just this week. Sisi spoke about the peace with Israel as a blessing to Egypt and to the region. I believe that if we go back to the Iranian strategy that has been revealed to take over the Middle East, actually a lot of people believe that Iran wants to take over Mecca because of religious reasons. So if you take the intentions of Iran and you look at the abilities of Israel, today the Arabs, the Sunni countries, are looking at Israel's abilities to intercept missiles, for example, which we learned to do after the Gaza wars. They look at Israel's ability to defend itself, and they look at the Israeli interest to stop the Iranians. They saw the Israel war in 2006, the second Lebanon war with Hezbollah. They saw our different wars in Gaza. They saw the ability that we have. They received some of our technologies. So today, both Sisi and Abdullah and the Gulf states leaders understand that in order to stop Iran, we have to work together.
You've traveled to the region, the Gulf states. What was your sense? Because you met with leaders while you were there.
You know, the individuals that are running those countries are the same people or families oftentimes who are funding the people flying planes into our buildings. So it's complicated. You don't want to rely on them as your number one ally. If it comes down to who you want to stand next to in a battle, you want to stand next to an Israeli. You don't want to stand next to an Iraqi soldier that's running away or attacking the base where the Americans are at. And so that's the sense that you put, is that there's obviously a big American presence. And that's why our president can go into Saudi Arabia and use the terminology radical Islamic terrorism, and people are not running towards the door. It's not that idea, because these regimes understand it's a threat from within to them, to their existence. And so you can call yourself a king, but your kingdom may not be very stable. You could be a prince, but the other royal family is the person writing the check to ISIS. It gets more complicated in that region than it does, I think, for the Iranians. They have a supreme leader. So when they come in, they've got their guardian council of 12. They have a supreme leader who sets all of their religious, ideological, political motivations, and their spread of their networks now, I think it's very frightening. You wouldn't think of an Iran that would fire a missile into or authorize one of its proxies to fire a missile at the Saudis. And it has.
Let's talk about the proxy aspect of this, because we talk about a proxy war. Let me define that. So Iran, although they are now sending troops into the region, before what they would do is utilize groups like Hamas and Hezbollah as their proxy. In other words, fighting the war for them. So you're in a conflict that is, I always say when you're dealing with the Middle East, you need to think nine-dimensionally. So when we talk about a proxy war, the Iranians have utilized other forces to advance their own agenda. Now, the reason the Iranians do not get along with, for instance, ISIS is part of the Shia-Sunni conflict, but also because Iran wants to establish the Great Caliphate when ISIS looked like they were establishing the caliphate. But let's focus in on the proxy nature of this asymmetrical conflict.
Well, I think that's a great concern, especially to Israel, because of their border with Lebanon. So what we have with Iran and their involvement in the Syrian war is that now Syria is going to become like a community of Iran. I mean, that's how serious it is, and that's how serious the involvement of Iran is in Syria. And next to Syria, we have Lebanon, which now is effectively being run by Hezbollah. So on the border of Israel, what we have is Hezbollah running a country, and they have free reign. So it's not like a terrorist group operating within a country. They are basically running the country. So we have the free flow of arms, sophisticated weapons, very sophisticated, from Iran through Syria into Lebanon, sitting 150,000 missiles ready and being aimed at major Israeli cities. And so that proxy war on that border of Israel and Lebanon with Hezbollah is very serious.
When we talk about Hezbollah, are we really talking about Iran?
I think so. In practice, this is the frontline position of Iran in this region. Frontline, the best equipped army, I would say, forces they have here, well trained, with over 40,000 missiles directed against Israel, covering maybe 2/3 of the state of Israel, and in the future, probably the whole state of Israel. Iran's forward forces are here. They don't need the Shihab missiles from Tehran. They don't need even yet to have nuclear weapons. They could threaten Israel. They could threaten the West by simply sitting in places where they can actually turn the Middle East into one big war.
Today, when we speak about the threat coming from 2,500 kilometers, with, ballistic missiles, no precise ballistic missiles that will be aimed on our, civilian population. And God forbid, I hope will never happen, but potentially with the warheads of, weapons of mass destruction, then this is something that you cannot exactly predict how it's going to happen.
The thing that some people don't talk about as much as the nuclear program is their missile program. Just a few weeks ago, they saw maybe a 30-meter, that would be a 90-foot missile in the desert in Iran. And so not only are they developing a nuclear program to get a nuclear bomb, but they're also developing missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that could reach not only Europe, but the east coast of the United States. And so and this is what Israeli officials have told us many, many times, it's not only a threat to Israel, it's a threat to the United States.
Jihadists consider Israel as a minor Satan. The great Satan, they call it America. It actually is the Western civilization. And when they call to wipe Israel off the map of the earth, they claim that they have to do it on the way to defeat the West.
Now we're seeing, of course, the rise of Islamic extremism.
قوي عزيز ومجالدة أعداء الله ووفقهم ومكنهم لتحقيق غايتهم وإن أردتم موعود الله فجاهدوا في سبيل الله.
I think this has been the dream that one day the caliphate would be reestablished, which is basically this Islamic empire ruled under Islamic Sharia law. This is something they had dreamed about, and now their dream has come true. And I think it's called ripples throughout the Islamic world, where whether it's in Libya or the Sinai Peninsula, as far away as the Philippines, it's sort of fueled the imagination of many Muslims, and now are pledging allegiance to ISIS.
Their long-range goal to kick the Jewish people into the ocean. No place for, negotiations. They're just there to do bad things.
The goal for ISIS and many of these jihadi groups is to eventually take over Jerusalem and have that as the capital of their future caliphate. And so Destination Jerusalem, that's exactly where they're heading.
As you've looked at the situation over the years, your sense today, what's your sense of where we are?
We're at a point where the issue has exploded in terms of consciousness of people now. I think we need to achieve a position where we're at least seeing it flatlining. Every week that goes by, we see a different news report about a different situation. And basically, we've had our eyes closed to this for decades, and we've all suddenly woken up and thought, oh my goodness, how did we get here, and how do we get ourselves out of the situation we're in?
Two men entered the building in the centre of the French capital late this morning.
and began firing. By the time they'd stopped, at least 12 people were dead. Many others were seriously injured.
Famed for its cafe culture, Parisians enjoying their Friday evening were sitting ducks for the terrorists. Parisians are scarcely able to believe the multiple atrocities which happened across their city. Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attacks.
We are in pursuit of the suspect vehicle. We've got shots fired out the back window.
They are both armed with assault rifles. They are both armed with handguns.
Gunfire erupted. You could hear it from the outside. And in the midst of the attack, the killer himself, authorities say he called 911 to pledge his allegiance to the terror group ISIS.
In an attack like this, all you can do is run. A lorry heads for the crowd. Witnesses spoke of how the vehicle swerved several times, maximising the carnage.
84 people we now understand have been killed. There are 80 more in a critical condition.
Reports of an explosion at an Ariana Grande concert. They have confirmed multiple fatalities and a number of injured right there at the scene.
Screams and panic tonight on Barcelona's most famous pedestrian street. They were running from a van that plowed into crowds on the street. Tonight, authorities are calling it an act of terrorism. ISIS is now claiming responsibility.
A deliberate act of terror, a man accused of using a truck as a weapon to kill innocent people.
This is the kind of lone wolf terrorism that keeps police up at night.
8 people are dead, at least 12 injured.
This was an act of terror, and a particularly cowardly act of terror.
So you've got, David, ISIS, you've got Hezbollah, you've got Hamas, and in Israel you're dealing with all of that, and there's others. I mean, that's just the kind of the big three.
The big three.
Yeah, but you have to deal with that as a country, and you've got to give advice to the military on how to engage it.
I think lawfare begins on the battlefield. I think what we have, our adversaries know to put us in situations which make it difficult for us legally. And I think if they weren't doing that, we wouldn't need so many lawyers advising us on how to conduct these wars. Once upon a time, we didn't have that many lawyers. Back in October 1973, back in the Six-Day War, there weren't that many legal questions. They didn't need too many lawyers like me.
But now the legal issues are huge.
Are very dominant, and in many ways one could argue that these terrorist organizations get more bang for their buck, so to speak, deliberately bringing about a situation where civilian casualties are incurred and using those for propaganda benefit, for diplomatic benefit against Israel, which one could say perhaps strategically is more of a threat to Israel even in relation to the military threat that these organizations can pose.
What about the diplomatic aspect of this? So you've got David brings up the point, and everybody's really touching on this. You've got an enemy that will utilize civilians as shields. They will utilize a hospital as a base to launch missiles, and then Israel tries to respond. I mean, we've defended Israel's interests before international tribunals, even at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. We'll win the case. But the damage inflicted upon Israel is within the court of public opinion. And as a diplomat, you've got to be able to respond to that.
Yeah, well, actually, if you look today at the map that was just released by the IDF of the 150,000 missiles Hezbollah planted, many of them in houses in villages in southern Lebanon. You understand, first of all, the strategy is to hide behind civilians. Now, from what we've seen, and we've seen it together, you, I, and Jordan were together in Israel during the Gazan War, 2008. We saw actually Hamas militants hiding inside ambulances. They took out of the ambulances the nurses and the doctors, and they went in with weapons and really fought through the ambulances. We saw the Hamas militants walking with children in the Gazan streets in order to fight the Israelis and not to have the Israeli soldiers being able to fight them. I believe that what the ACLJ has been doing since then, which is to expose the real face of the terrorists, the real strategy, we called it Hollywood. They were playing a game for the foreign media, is exactly what should be done. We have to expose it. We have to show what they're planning to do is part of the lessons learned from the past wars. Yeah. They're hiding behind it. They're trying to have the Israeli missiles that will hit missiles kill civilians, and by that they're going to try to have the international public opinion turn against Israel.
So, but the reality is, if the scenario Rami paints becomes reality, which there's no basis to believe it would not become reality, that makes Israel's job that much more difficult, not only defending itself internally, but defending itself externally.
I shudder to think of what a future Lebanon war will look like for that reason, because Israel will have to protect itself on a predicted rate of something like 1,500 missiles falling on Israel, on population centers every single day. That's incredible. That's like saturation point. And the IDF will have to counter that like very rapidly in the initial days of the war. And just to think what that will inflict on the other end, on the other side, unavoidably, that we have to prepare the world for that kind of scenario.
And I think a lot of that is preparing
That's
the world.
ideology, learning that most ideologies would not thrive by saying, let's bring the war to a school. So most ideologies would say, we keep the school out of the war as much as possible. That's like the last place, or the hospital. But if you take the battle and your ideology proudly proclaims, put the target at the school, put the target at the hospital, and that can survive. And a mentality that takes, you've got to, again, educate people. I think, as David just said, you have to prepare them for what you will have to do to ultimately take this out. Because if people have been indoctrinated to think it's okay to put their kids in harm's way like that, to use their kids' school as a first line of defense instead of the last, or the hospital as the first line of the war instead of the last, you've got a different enemy than most of us can even fully comprehend. It's not the mindset of the military versus military, or the warrior against warrior. It's the kid shielding a terrorist who is being propped up by a prince and being propped up by a foreign government. And so our support of Israel, standing with Israel, is so important. We have to have our allies, our real allies as well, not just the economic, not just the countries we do business with, but who is going to be there at the end of the day that would shed blood for you and vice versa. Who are you going to actually stand up for? And there's got to be countries around the world that you say, okay, we will do that, and you have to do it diplomatically as well.
Right now, as the American Center, what we have to do and what we are doing, we are building the defense. We know that one day we will be back at the International Criminal Court. We will be back at the UN defending the interests of Israel in the next Lebanon war. The writing is on the wall because we know what they're going to do, and we know what the charges against Israel are going to be. It's going to be civilian deaths, unnecessary civilian deaths, crimes against humanity, and all the charges that have been built against Israel at the International Criminal Court and the UN in the Gaza wars of the past. So we know the blueprint that Hezbollah is using. So right now at the American Center, we are putting together the infrastructure, the research, and the data that will serve as the basis of a defense of a war that has yet to come. And that's why we have to always be on our toes in this region of the world.
In military action, there's this discussion of preemptive strikes, where you take a preemptive move in order to prevent what would be a greater harm. In the legal arena, when you're dealing with this kind of conflict, you also have to take preemptive action. And as Stuart just laid out, we're taking that preemptive action right now. So we've got a team within the ACLJ, our office in Jerusalem, our offices in Washington, lawyers in New York, around the globe, literally working right now as we speak, as we're coming to you, working on what will be preemptive measures to respond to what inevitably will be an outcry from the well-orchestrated and unfortunately well-organized, and as Jordan said, with the princes that are backing it up, well-financed opposition to Israel.
They call the war that they're engaged in asymmetric warfare. They understand the firepower that the West has. Therefore, they have to do two things. They have to engage in terrorism and subversion as their modus operandi in the battlefield, but they also have to neutralize the superior military force of the West. Lawfare is the way they're going to do it.
When you see a situation like we are in, being attacked by thousands of rockets, from Hamas, for years after we have left Gaza altogether, and then we defend ourselves in a short war of 2 or 3 weeks. and then we become the war criminals. This is really either ludicrous, or call it what the adjective you want to add here. This is really abuse of law.
They've for years worked well with the international media. And so it's the same basic process. Instead of talking just to a favorite reporter at CNN or something else, what they have to do here is feed material to human rights organizations or to the UN.
As we are challenged by our enemies, by this kind of activities, using their populations, their civilians as human shield, and being aware from the international community misunderstanding in certain cases and hypocrisy in other cases, being ready to manipulate it by our adversary.
Every war is fought in two places at the same time, in the battlefield and on the screen. To take, paraphrase Shakespeare, all the world the screen. And you get your information on the screen. If you lose the screen, you may lose the war.
The phrase is called lawfare. It's a term that describes exploiting existing legal systems to use as a weapon against one's opponents in an effort to damage or delegitimize them. In the context of Israel, this is an attempt to use international organizations, international tribunals to do just that, delegitimize the Jewish state. So I want to spend some time talking about lawfare. David, you said that the first act of lawfare takes place on the battlefield.
Absolutely. Adversaries that Israel has, like Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in Gaza, what they do is try and draw Israel into situations which are going to cause massive civilian casualties. They do that by using human shields. The tragedy is that insofar as the international community has been buying into this and accepting this and painting Israel as being the bad guy for defending itself against potential massive missile attacks, this is incentivizing this conduct even more. Human shielding pays today. And at the bottom line of that is more and more civilian casualties.
Jordan, you have studied the whole issue of what I would call the issue of war crimes. It's now called crimes against humanity. They'll come up with different phrases. But there is this sense that Israel is the primary culprit. That's what's seen in the body politic in world opinion.
Yeah, and the belligerents, if you will, really should be the people putting civilians in harm's way intentionally. It's not those who are defending themselves against that group, but it's the people like it's Hamas or Hezbollah and their commanders who are benefiting, and the people who go out and speak for them, who are saying, oh, look what's happened to these civilians. Why did you put the rocket there next to the school? That's the person that committed actually an act of war or a crime against humanity by putting the child there, a minor there who has no decision point on this whatsoever. Those are illegal acts that the world has acknowledged as wrong or evil to the point where we would actually prosecute it. And yeah, it's turned around. But at a point, you can't just take the incoming anymore. You have to respond.
This is the front line also of the war against Israel in so many ways. And I know we work on this here at ACLJ in terms of the law aspect and also in terms of what you do, being out there and delivering a message, which is so important, because we have a generation that's growing up. The narrative they've gotten is false. The narrative they've gotten is that Israel is an illegal occupier, and therefore anything Israel does starts off in the wrong, right? Because they're trying to maintain an illegal presence. That's not true, and it's perverse. And look, the history of anti-Semitism, which leads to Jewish destruction, has been the same since the Bible, right? We know that Pharaoh begins it, and it never changes. There's what's a blood libel. The term blood libel is created about the way the Jews have been treated around the world. And now the corporate body of Jews is the state of Israel. And so now we have blood libels about Israel, and they play out in diplomacy, in the law, especially, in international circles. And this is playing out as a way to turn Israel into a pariah state. And exactly what David's talking about in terms of human shields, they know that people will fall prey to this and are gullible for this. And this is the front in which Israel is fighting. It's not, and it comes down to tying Israel's hands to physically defend itself against its attacks by using all these instrumentalities around the world.
I just want to also make it clear that we're not only talking about international reform. We at ACLJ, we've already defended one major federal case in Washington, D.C. against the state of Israel. We're defending another one right now. And the most, incredibly enough, the most important weapon in their arsenal right now is imprecision. Everyone knows in technological fields, precision in language is important, otherwise your program won't compile. it's more dangerous in law because the program might still compile even if it's wrong and people don't catch those imprecisions. And so, again, conflating these terms, it's coming to America now as well. We have to be very careful.
I actually look at the issue when we talk about the lawsuit you're talking about that we defended in U.S. District Court in Washington. But yet again, it's kind of an international tribunal in this sense. It's the ability to utilize legal systems there now in the United States. There it could be in France, it could be in the United Kingdom, but we experienced it in the United States, where we had to go to the court to defend what was, in our view, a ridiculous lawsuit, 200 pages thick. But you know, we had to litigate that case for over a year to get it to a resolution. Of course, now it's being appealed. All of that being done for one purpose and one purpose only: delegitimize Israel.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The IRS now formally apologizing to Tea Party groups.
The IRS did the right thing by resolving the case with an injunction that mandated a complete change of the IRS nonprofit tax-exempt work as it relates to issue advocacy organization.
If any group feels like they're being targeted, they can go to federal court and bring our case. That's a victory.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history, to take on the IRS and win.
For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this. They're fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
Those of us that believe in life know that we're on the right side of history. We understand full well children are children, and they're precious in God's sight, and they're precious in our nation's sight, and they're precious to parents.
But I actually think we're winning. This is one of the social issues we're winning.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
They're rushing us to the airport, and there was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, now we're really out of Turkey and free again.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, you know, they were getting all this out.
All of the people who prayed for us through ACLJ and through your contacts, I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
I'm before you today, and it's a humbling experience for me. My grandfather, Jay Sekulow, traveled from Russia in 1914 aboard a boat that took him past the Statue of Liberty. He was a fruit peddler in Brooklyn, New York. His grandson, me, I get to argue cases at the Supreme Court of the United States, in international tribunals, and now appear before you. It is humbling. But the task that we have before us is great. And we have no time for delay. In one of my very first Supreme Court arguments, one of the legal journals said I was rude, aggressive, and obnoxious. We won that case unanimously. In 2009, we opened our permanent office in Jerusalem. 1 year later, I found myself before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the ICC. The Palestinian Authority, much like the BDS movement of today, sought to utilize an international tribunal for one purpose and one purpose only: to delegitimize the Jewish state of Israel. I argued the law, and the law was clear. The Palestinian Authority was not a state. It had no business being before the ICC, and the case must be dismissed. BDS is the flip side of that same coin. We call it lawfare, utilizing the legal system to delegitimize a people or a group.
Our latest harvest is ready for bottling at Psagot, an Israeli winery in the West Bank. Owner Jacob Berg says business is growing, but so is a boycott movement against his wine.
It's not the final customer. It's not the majority of the world that believe in those things. It's really it's very, very small organization. Few organizations. The problem is that they have a lot of power and they have a lot of money.
That organization is BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement. Co-founder Omar Barghouti started BDS a decade ago to force Israel to end what he says is a system of discrimination against Palestinians. His movement has activists in many countries and tens of thousands of followers on social media.
Support for the BDS movement has been growing on British campuses, but critics accuse it of fueling anti-Semitism and attacks against Jewish students.
No one protected us. No one was there to keep us safe. No one was there for the aftermath of it. No one asked if we were okay.
People breaking in through windows, banging on the doors. I thought I was in the middle of a war.
We've had a number of cases with a number of students that have stood up for their rights, but the reason they had to stand up for their rights was because they were being attacked, sometimes physically, sometimes verbally, because of their stand on Israel. And it's not just Jewish students we're talking about.
Yeah, the university campus is an excellent place to start because the lie that BDS feeds off of is that this is not anti-Semitism, it's anti-Zionism or anti-Israel. And yet you see students who have literally no ties to the state but are just Jewish or have said things like, I support the state of Israel without any kind of political ramifications being attacked and even again up to physically attacked, being harassed. And it's important again as well, you know, ACLJ, we're a free speech supporting organization. There's a difference between legitimate criticism of Israel and what BDS is. BDS is not the legitimate criticism of Israel. BDS is feeding on the kind of imprecision and distorted tactics that we talked about when we were discussing lawfare to make Israel into a pariah and then to create this false sense of civil rights that feeds on impressionable young students.
What I would like to say is that perhaps the most outrageous thing about BDS is its very name. Because people say BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. How come is it that you automatically mean Israel? There are so many countries in the world which really deserve to be boycotted, divested, sanctioned. And yet you say BDS, of course, what could it be other than Israel? That in itself is just so outrageous and surreal.
We shouldn't forget, you know, people think that boycott, divestment, and sanctions might not be the biggest deal, that when the Nazis came to power, the first thing that they did was set up a boycott of Jewish businesses.
That's how effective their propaganda campaign has been, that acronym. It refers to Israel and Israel only. With all the horrors going on in the world, BDS stands for Israel. And that's one of the things that we continuously work on here at the American Center, is really educating people following our work as to what the methodology and the approaches are of this enemy out there that is spreading this misinformation campaign throughout the world, but on college campuses in the United States, because BDS, in terms of economic boycott and sanctions and divestiture, really hasn't been that successful.
No, it has not.
But what it has done, it has helped promulgate an anti-Semitism on college campuses throughout this country that is unprecedented.
You know, I've said that the BDS movement has encouraged a legitimacy, which is illegitimate to begin with, of anti-Semitism. In other words, they'll say, though, of course, it's not anti-Semitic, Jeff, it's anti-Israel because of Israel's policies, not against the Jews. But as I said at the beginning of this documentary, and we'll say it again, that is part and parcel of the same people group. And this dichotomy they're trying to draw, this distinction, is a distinction with no difference.
100%. You know, when we started getting involved in this and very aggressive, taking leadership roles as ACLJ in this fight on so many levels, one of the things that kept on coming up was some of the other groups, many of the other groups, especially, you know, the Jewish groups were concerned we shouldn't make it about Jews. We shouldn't make it about Israel. Let's try to generically make rules against boycott. Well, you know what? This is about Jews. It is about Israel. This is a real fight. It's a fight in law.
Well, you know, I think, and Mark pointed out what's really important is, you know, the purpose of the BDS movement is to delegitimize Israel and Jews. And that's exactly what happened in Europe before and during the Holocaust, is just delegitimizing Jews and making them worthless and people that were not worthy of living. And so on our college campuses today, these Jewish students go to school, and you can imagine as parents, you send your child to college to enjoy the college life, and they're hit with this vigilant form of anti-Semitism that's emotionally, physically, and destabilizing their entire career at their school and maybe their future.
But I think it's important for you to say again the fact that when you look at BDS, it is targeted, very targeted, and very direct.
You cannot ignore the fact that only one country in the entire world is being picked on here. And which one is it? It's the Jewish one. Only one country is being singled out for this treatment. Only one.
You look at a country like Iran, that's one of the greatest human rights violators in the entire world. And after this Iran nuclear deal was reached, you have companies from all over the world flocking to do business in Iran. But is there a boycott of Iranian goods? No. In fact, the world is encouraged to go in there, and they have a track record of abusing their own citizens and foreigners.
Well, we've won in court on these BDS attempts. The fact is, it still creates this impression that it's okay to target Israel. And that's part of the battle here.
Well, you know, thank God Congress heard testimony last year from Jonathan Schanzer, a former U.S. Treasury official, about the fact that Hamas is actually funding the BDS movement. And we've seen on campus a real drop in BDS support after it became clear that there are operatives and money flowing through from terrorist organizations, U.S.-designated terrorist organizations, to the BDS movement. And so I think they've lost a little bit of the moral high ground on that point.
And they lost the moral high ground, and still we're also beating them in court.
Yeah.
So the courts are saying to them, no.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. They've tried their approach in federal courts throughout the country, and they've lost their position.
They keep bringing them back, but they keep losing.
And they've been rejected quickly and outright.
I think the issue persists, though, David. I mean, I think that this idea that, as you said, targeting it against, you say BDS, you assume Israel, because that's the way it is. That messaging will continue. So we've got to be prepared to be aggressive in fighting it any time it raises.
You have to accept this is the new anti-Semitism. People generally don't go out and speak against Jews. If you want to bring your anti-Semitism out there, you speak against Israel and you catch it all. And BDS is perhaps the most widespread expression of that today.
But the reality is the whole BDS movement is based on a fundamental fraud. And that is the idea that what Israel does should be targeted because it's the Jewish state. Because at the end, that's what it's about.
BDS is a new form of anti-Semitism. Today, it's not politically correct to say, I hate Jews. So you say, I hate the state of Israel. The call to boycott the state of Israel, to divest investment from the state of Israel, and to apply sanctions. We should not accept it. It's pure anti-Semitism. We shouldn't be quiet when you hear people that call for the destruction of the state of Israel. What we did at the UN was remarkable. We stood proud and we said we are here to fight back against BDS. We will fight them on campuses. We will fight them in the courts of law, what you are doing day in and day out, and we will fight them in the halls of the UN.
They cloak it in the garb of the civil rights movement. This is no civil rights movement. This is an unconstitutional and illegal advocacy taking place in the United States of America. Make no mistake, the goal is unambiguous. The intent is clear. It is to create an environment so hostile that those students of you that are here today would be afraid to say the word, I am a Zionist. I am a Jew. Never, never, on the memory of our families, should we allow that to take place, and the least in the United States of America.
It really is an honor to stand here at the United Nations, of all places, celebrating and not condemning the 50th anniversary of the reunification of Jerusalem. Because we all know what happens here almost on a daily basis at the United Nations. So it is historic for us to all be here tonight celebrating a reunified Jerusalem and the capital of Israel. 50 years is a very special number in the Jewish tradition. The rabbis noted in the ancient biblical text a period of 50 years is sometimes referred to by the word le'olam. It also means forever. In the Talmud, Rabbi Akiva says that the word netzach, which means eternity or victory, refers to the city of Jerusalem itself. In this case, I think it's very clear that while we are celebrating the netzach, the victory of the first 50 years of having Jerusalem reunited, we are also celebrating the netzach, the eternity of having Jerusalem reunited forever under the Jewish state of Israel. We, the supporters of Israel and the supporters of Jerusalem, must be on the offensive. We must shift the narrative. It cannot just be all of us on the defensive anymore. For civil liberties, for religious freedom, for true democracy, Israel is the only country in that region of the world that stands up to the values that we hold so dear in the United States of America. And the best way to combat lies is with truth.
We know that you understand that the story of Israel, in many ways, the rebirth of Israel, and our return to this land and to this city, I think you understand in your hearts that this is a parable for all humanity.
In 1948, Israel as a nation received this body. But in 1967, with Jerusalem, Israel had a heart. We are proud to support Israel, proud to celebrate Jerusalem now, le'olam, forever.
Your support of the American Center for Law and Justice allows us to defend Israel in international tribunals, in the courts of public opinion, and the halls of legislatures. On this documentary, we've laid out the case of why Israel exists, why it must exist, and why we in the United States and those around the world need to defend the only true democracy in the Middle East. It's for our own interest, the interests of our allies. It's based on the law, based on the scriptures. It's based on decency and humanity. The case for Israel.